more sessions to go. So today we will have three patient stories to be discussed, and we have Rajagopal sir with us, and Dr. Anne Roderick will be joining shortly. Who is the first presenter, Adam?
Sir, I think Dr. Bini George. Ma'am?
Okay, Dr. Bini,
Yeah. Yes, I'm ready.
you can start.
Good evening, everybody. I'm waiting for my slides.
Ma'am, is it visible, ma'am?
Yeah, I can see.
Yes, it is visible.
Okay.
Yeah, please go on.
Thank you very much, Arun sir. Good evening to all. I'm a dental surgeon. I practice in Salem. My husband and I, we have our own private practice here. We are also associated with the Sharon Palliative Care Center here in Salem. Because we see a lot of surgical work happens in our clinic, I'd like to present this case of mucormycosis. Next slide, please. Many of you may be aware of the recent surge in the number of mucormycosis cases, especially after the second wave of COVID-19. As you all know, it's a fungal infection. And this part of Tamil Nadu, that is Salem, is endemic to the disease. But in the last 2 months, we have seen a surge of cases, so much so that almost 40 to 45 patients we've been seeing in the last 2 months alone presenting to us with mucormycosis. As you know, it is one of the complications of COVID, post-COVID mucormycosis. And it's usually among diabetics with blood sugar, which is not controlled, and they've been on very high doses of steroids during their COVID infection. So I've isolated just one case to share with you today, who was diagnosed with post-COVID mucormycosis. He's a male aged 43. He was referred to us by an ENT surgeon, basically for a fabrication of a dental prosthesis, something like a feeding plate by which he could eat. The ENT surgeon had already done a resection of the maxilla on the right side, and also the right eye was excentrated. Next slide, please. So when he came to us, he complained of severe headache and pain on the left side of the maxilla also. He had a swelling on the left side of the face, and basically he was referred for rehabilitation. He needed teeth to be put on his maxilla so that he could eat. Next slide, please. So we made an impression, and I gave him a prosthesis, basically what we call an obturator or a feeding plate. So when we inquired about the history of his illness, he said that he was RT-PCR positive first week of May with a CORAD score of 5 and a CT severity index of 14/25. He could not get a bed in his local village, so his wife brought him on a scooter to the GH here in Salem. At the time of admission, his blood sugar was something like close to 500 milligrams per deciliter. He was breathless and required about 4 liters of oxygen. He was treated with parenteral steroids, insulin, and oral hypoglycemics. And after his infection subsided and he was sent home, discharged after the oxygen and steroids were tapered. Next slide, please. So here you see a picture of a CT scan, which shows almost 60% involvement of the lungs. Next slide. How it started was 1 week after he was discharged from the GH, he complained of persistent headache and pain in the maxillary teeth. So that's when he visited the ENT surgeon, and who diagnosed the mucormycosis with a KOH mount and a biopsy with a FES procedure. And he had done the resection and sent him to us. Next slide, please. So there you see the pre-op CTs where bilateral ethmoid, maxillary, and sphenoid sinuses are involved. Next slide. And this was the MRI pre-op, which confirms the diagnosis. Next slide, please. So after the first surgery, this was the picture. As you can see, the right eye and the right maxilla has been resected, but there is residual lesion on the left side of the maxilla. Luckily, it does not involve the left eye. Next slide, please. So when he came to us, when I called him back for a review, he complained of pain, this time on the left side, and a nasal discharge. So he was re-evaluated by our oral and maxillofacial surgeon in our clinic, and he was advised additional resection of the left maxilla and the residual lesion. So he was counseled by the maxillofacial surgeon and also assured of quality of life post-operatively through recent rehabilitation methods. Next slide, please. So the final surgical treatment included resection of the left maxilla, the palate and the orbital floor. A fresh obturator was made and we discharged the patient after post-op counseling. Next slide. So I've taken the permission of the patient to show you these pictures. So this is what the patient looks like. Previous slide, please. Yeah. As you can see, he has lost all of his maxilla. Next slide, please. And then, of course, the right eye. And this is the obturator or the feeding plate I was talking to you about. Essentially, it acts as a, what shall I say, it prevents food from going into the nasal cavity. And also he may be able to speak because it prevents, it helps him in phonation. Next slide, please. So this is the second day post-op and the 10th day post-op pictures. As you can see, the lesion has healed well. Next slide, please. So this is the handsome young man who, unfortunately, by just one infection of mucormycosis, has lost his midface and his right eye. Next slide, please. So the treatment, as I said, multiple procedures and a total maxillectomy and right eye had to be removed. Concomitantly, he needed antifungal medications, that is liposomal amphotericin, which is very expensive, as you know, and followed by posaconazole for a long duration. He needed a temporary obturator, which helped him to feed, as well as he needed psychiatric counseling because he was very depressed and very anxious. And the psychiatrist put him on sertraline 25 milligrams and clonazepam. Next slide, please. So coming to the psychosocial aspects, of course, there is a lot. I'm not going to read all of that because I've been told I can give only 10 minutes to this. But mainly the patient, he had a guilt that he had brought it onto himself. And there was this, he even tried to commit suicide at home, but because of his wife and his children's intervention, timely intervention, he was prevented from doing it. So he was basically very depressed and he saw no meaning in life, and the disfigurement he had on his face was very troublesome and he just couldn't accept it. So his wife, his parents, unfortunately, they thought that they would get the disease, or it was a communicable disease. They slowly left the house. So the family of his wife and children were left alone. And even the family, the other members of the family were hostile to the family because of their intercaste marriage. And even when the children went out to buy provisions, the whole neighborhood thought that this was a communicable disease and they isolated them, which is very sad. Next patient, please. So the main concerns were his disability and disfigurement, his suicidal ideation, the social stigma, his inability to eat properly, and he wishes to get back to work and earn for his family. And he's always concerned whether his form and function will come back, which we have reassured him with implants. We can make his face more functional and his eating will be normal as before. And also the family requires economic support. Next slide, please. So this is the summary of a 43-year-old man with post-COVID rhinocerebral mucormycosis. He had extensive surgery on his face, which included resection of the total maxilla and excimeration of the eye. This caused deformity, disability, psychosocial problems, prompting him to consider suicide. He was counseled and offered psychiatric evaluation. And he was also given a palliative feeding plate, which enabled him to eat to a certain extent. Next slide, please. So essentially, I was only going to put another side or another dimension to our palliative care discussions, which we have here. That is how prosthesis can help people to live a near normal life and accept themselves, which is very important. So we usually talk about medications, but I thought I wanted to share this with you to show that, even people with like this who have such serious deformities can get back into to live a near normal life. So the discussion points I have would be, can this patient and his family be integrated into society? What kind of psychosocial counseling may be required for the patient and family in the long run? Can quality of life be restored by providing form and function? And is there any way with which economic assistance can be provided to the family? Thank you very much for your kind hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Bini. Arun, Dr. Gaviria, join. Arun?
I think no, sir.
No, okay. So I think this is a very relevant story, considering the prevalence of mucormycosis. And I think there are many patients, but I don't know how many patients underwent this type of surgery. But this looks into, as Dr. Bini told, into the palliative care aspect of COVID and its complication. So anybody would like to comment on any of these points?
At this juncture, I would just like to thank Dr. Rajagopal and the team at Pallium for providing us that COVID-19 protocols. It was immensely useful to us in the early first phase, especially. Thank you very much, sir.
Anybody has any idea, or what's your comment about this patient?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mohit. I would be, am I audible and clear?
Yes, you are audible.
Sir, I am also a dental surgeon, and like as ma'am was saying, we have also been encountering these patients very frequently post-COVID, and we've had a similar presentation and of cases there and difficulty of rehabilitation. And I was also planning to present something on obturation, but somehow I chose on head and neck cancer, and I would be presenting that next. I think next is my turn. Only thing I would like to add here was what we've been working on is the prosthetic rehabilitation after the obturation using the cortical implants now. And we've got both endoosteal cases. I can share with you personally if you want, with the maxillofacial surgeon's permission, where we've used zygomatic implants,
Yes.
pterygoid, and we've used the nasal floor. And it was better with the cortical or basal implants when we used bilaterally. And now, because it's a very short period to comment on, but I feel on the longer run, we would have much more evidence-based literature regarding which kind of prosthesis would work. There is one case I would like to discuss here is where the maxillofacial surgeons and the prosthetic department used magnet-related prosthetic appliance, which somehow unfortunately was discouraged, because just after the placement of that magnetic prosthesis, the patient required an MRI, and unfortunately that was contraindicated. So somehow it's an easy option, a tricky decision to make, but easier option also. Possibility is using magnets.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan.
Okay, thank you. And do you have any experience? I don't know whether you have heard about this patient. Did you hear what we were discussing?
I'm very sorry. I needed to arrive late. I apologize.
No problem. Ma'am.
Okay,
Sunil,
it's okay. Yeah,
Sunil,
Sheetal, yeah,
Yeah,
sir,
good evening,
Sheetal
sir.
has raised hands.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I just to share that this is a common agony for most of us. I think in every city, those of us who have been treating COVID have faced this. I don't think I can add to it, but I just wanted to share that it was very distressing to watch so many people get disfigured in so short a time. And the moment people finished their COVID treatment, this had started surfacing. And I have seen so many patients like this. And the most difficult part I found was not just their disfigurement. They were going home to a home where probably a lot of family members were not alive anymore. So this was extremely distressful. And I thought last year's first wave was distressful, but this was somehow visually more,
Very
I
true.
felt distressful to see. I just wanted to share that, sir.
Okay, thank you, Sheetal. Sir, um,
Uh, so, and you haven't heard this case presentation, so maybe you can come and you can, sorry. Maybe I'll start the discussion about this one. Dr. Bini George, Dr. Mohit, congratulations. Yeah, I mean, Bini, your presentation showed how much you actually cared for the patient, for the cruelty of the society who even now do this horrors to people with illnesses. I remember a quarter of a century back, we used to do this to people with HIV, and we are continuing to do this. And congratulations on obviously what you have done a great job with the surgery. I have a couple of questions. You mentioned pain a few times. What kind of pain was it? Is he still having the pain? Any pain?
No, sir. No, sir. He doesn't have pain now. He's comfortable. It's more like he was depressed and he would not, he didn't have any pain at the site where we operated, where the surgery was done, nor the plate which we gave. Of course, we did some adjustments to the plate, but he just couldn't come to terms with that he had to eat this way. And every day he will come, not every day, whenever he comes, he say, I just want to eat a full meal. I'm so hungry. I want a full meal. So that was more the pain that he was suffering, not due to the disease. Sir.
So I don't, will you stop the screen share for a minute and allow me to share something? Benny is asking about the various elements of suffering. Most of the, and you have been mentioning most of these.
Yes.
The physical aspect of it, you have spent days on end to correct it. And the psychiatrist has started an antidepressant.
Yes.
If there is clinical depression, that should help. But the sadness out of his loss is causing grief, cannot be treated by antidepressants. He has lost a lot, which naturally is causing him great emotional distress. Social issues are huge. And what I expect to happen is when this is over, the children also will be emotional wrecks. So, and of course, he would be, so he would, I mean, I would be surprised if he didn't have suicidal ideation. Very clearly, life for him is worse than death. Your questions, I mean, let me just make a point. When we, now he is not in pain, so I'll forget, but otherwise, when we talk about pain, we'll remember the assessment, including what it means for the person. But coming back to this, he has, his life is meaningless to him. He has brought it all on himself, he says, or on the family, and the whole family is destroyed. So Vinny's question is, you have done such wonderful surgical work. What more needs to be done? where can you are asking specifically, can financial support be given? So let me put the question back to you, Vinny. If in various these areas, what more can the treating team do? Your training is in doing that surgical procedure and repeated surgical procedures. Can he afford it, Vinny? Is he in debt already?
He is in debt. See, it's not because of the surgery. It is that amphotericin, doctor, which he was asked to take, which
So,
I don't know.
Let me reflect the question back to you, Vinny. There is a huge economic burden. We were saying that happened already to 55 million people in India every year, and now with COVID, it must be so much worse. So
Yes.
let me put the question back to you. What can we do about it?
So, see, we have asked him to, rather his wife is a very person who can get things done. So she has gone back to the government and asked for, they have a provision in the government by which if you bring your reports, they refund a certain amount of money from the government for your expenses for related to COVID. That is one thing. I've asked a counselor, that is a lady friend of mine, to counsel the wife on how she can manage and try to get her a job in the nearby place, in the village where she is. And that's about all. I mean,
Vinny, I am glad you are doing that. Sorry to interrupt. I am glad you are doing that. You are thinking in those lines, because this financial issue, which you are concerned with, we are leaving it to the wife to handle, along with handling the children, along to handling the care of the man. If we someday, our medical system doesn't do that, someday maybe your team would include a social worker who would take on. Does the woman know how to apply? Does she will like to go from office to office? You know what happens to people in our government offices? Maybe some of those things can be facilitated if our team has a social worker dedicated to this task. And about the person wondering what is the, well, I'm so sad, I wish I were dead. What's happening to me? Can I now reflect the question back to the rest of the participants? Only Vinny, the facilitators, and Mohit and I have talked so far. Everybody else, what do you think?
So there is, good evening, sir. This is Dr. Geetika. So we all have come across patients of mucormycosis because it has been very rampant. So the biggest problem, the first question was, can it be incorporated? Can the family be considered at a community level? So I think the biggest problem lies in the first question. They are simply not accepted. Leave aside the community, the extended family, the relative. At times, the disfigurement is so bad, it's so immense that even the family, the immediate family is facing problems accepting the reality now. And so there is another problem which has occurred is that some of them could not get back to work because of this problem, because of their own thought process that what will people say and what the feeling of the body image problem. And in some cases, they were probably said things which were not too good to hear and they had to leave. So the economic burden which we were talking about has only increased after the surgical processes.
So was it Geetika who spoke?
Yes.
Geetika, yes.
Sir.
I totally agree. These are the problems. Can we talk about some solutions?
So Deepak here.
Hi, Deepak.
Can I think one thing that I have found kind of useful over the last few years is thinking of it in 3 levels, right? So I think all physicians have to know, like in whichever field we're practicing, to know the global gold standard of treatment, right? I mean, it's not an excuse to say that, okay, fine, we're in a developing country, so we don't know it. I mean, one is knowing for whichever condition, knowing the global gold standards of treatment. Second is what is the best available in the country or in that locality or whatever. And the third is the best treatment that is affordable for the patient. Many a times what we've kind of, I mean, what I mean, I work in community health, and generally what we see is that, many a times patients who can't really afford it, people still push for the best available care, and that's obviously in good faith, and I totally see the sense and this thing, I mean, the reason need to do that. But it's also, but I mean, to factor in also how much the patient can pay and what is the, because it's easy to say that, we will get arrange funds from somewhere and all of that. But before that, the previous this thing is what you prescribe also, right? Because many a times I've seen patients who, for gastric problems, right? Even though Rantac is available, even though Pantop is available, people still go for, your esomeprazole and all your fancy PPIs. I'm nothing against it, but I think that how much of a cost benefit will that extra, I mean, thinking of all therapies in terms of cost benefit, I think that helps. I don't know. I mean, it's just I mean, this group is obviously knows more. So I think it's just a thought. I've always felt that approach of thinking at 3 levels kind of helps me. So.
Thank you, Deepak. In pharmacology, we learn about all the pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics. But when the question comes up, how much does that cost a particular medicine? Very few doctors know how much each medicine costs. And therefore, what we end up prescribing in our country, this is not global. I mean, I don't know about USA, and will can tell us, but in most Western European countries, you cannot prescribe anything that you like. I mean, you have to go by some protocols. And here, whatever the medical industry wants you to prescribe is uppermost in our mind. We are not deliberately aiming to create an economic hardship, but we end up doing that. Now, let me ask all of you, if in your own work setting, a hospital, wherever, a few people get together and study their prescription habits and check whether we are really using the most cost-effective medicines. Are we using the cost-effective formulations? That will be a huge help for our patients in our country. I mean, the whole healthcare system has to be ashamed that we are pushing 55 million people below poverty line in 1 year. Much of it can be reduced. So, Deepak, thank you for the suggestion. Anybody, how much time do we have? No, I think time for this is up. But a quick comment from anybody else? Any other participants? Subini, shall we leave it?
Can I just share this information? See, most of our patients did not require amphotericin, because for this, the surgical management, if it was only related to the maxilla, it was a thorough curettage or what, just removing the lesion and the area which was affected was what was needed. But invariably, many times, there were many doctors who said that they need amphotericin, and lysosomal amphotericin, I think 5 milligrams cost something like 7,000 rupees, which is very expensive to take a full course of 300 milligrams per day would be.
Thank you, Benny. The Deepak's comments and my reaction to it is not about the specific cost in this person. It is not a criticism about the management of this person. There must have been enough justification, and we grant that. That please take it as only as a general comment about medical system as a whole and what happens to people. Anybody else? Any other participant with a quick comment or question? Kini, you have brought up such a huge issue that people are. Oh, I think BSN has come out with a comment. Sunil, were you able to say something?
No, actually, yeah.
BSN, you want to read out your comment?
Sir,
Okay,
I think we should be just there for the patient and for the caregiver, because we can actually guide her on how she can go about her activities. Even the children, you don't know what state the children will also be in. Like they have been watching their father and then seeing the father like this in this state.
Thank you, BSN. Absolutely. This brings up the final issue that we need to talk about, the emotional and spiritual issues. Why am I alive? I wish I were dead. I am, and now there is more surgical procedures to be done. Where will the money come from? I will destroy my family. I might as well be dead. As BSN said, being there, well, offering solutions when there are solutions, but conveying that we care and being there for them certainly is a huge thing. And if they have, one of the risks that I see is now they will go from another system to another system and spend more money, because that's usually what happens in that bargaining phase of reconcilement. So as BN says, I am glad you are doing that, Bini and team. You are there for them. And giving them loving attention and care, conveying that you care certainly is a big part of the management. But of course, at the end of the day, we will also remember that you and I cannot solve all the problems. We can only try our best. But I'll certainly, even such a terrible situation, Bini, I'll look around for some treatment support for them. Who knows? Even without identifying the person's name, just a social media post from your rehabilitation service may fetch some support. These are things that often are done. I thank you very much. Back to you, Sunil.
Sunil, can I
think,
just, oopsie.
Yes.
We have very little experience with Mucor in the United States. We did not see this with COVID patients. We've seen it in immunosuppressed patients over our years. But I think, Bini, the principle of non-abandonment, you've taken care of other patients with head and neck cancers that are very disfiguring, people with cleft palate. Modeling as you are how to speak to them, to not be shunning them. The principle of non-abandonment is absolutely what you've been illustrating, and I salute you. Even as physicians, nurses, we sometimes recoil from things that are very hard to look at, but staying with the patient, showing the family that we're not abandoning, and nor should they, I think is a very important principle. So hats off to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think one of the main issue in this patient story would be social isolation. He is isolated. He and his family members. You were talking about his children, because the family and the community thinks it is something that can be it can be contagious. So I think we should start from family and go to the community, so that the social isolation can be reduced. Then we need to think about the other things. That's what I think. So and also it would be important for that person that he already lost his eye and disfigured his face. So there, sir was talking about grief, which not only occurs in death, but also he might be grieving because of that loss. So we have to consider that factor also. Uh, and as I told, we may not be able to do all the things, but do all the possible things by giving psychosocial support, um, and we also can include the community in caring him. But for that, we have to do first the awareness of the community. This is going to be a big problem in India. So thank you for presenting this patient story, and I think we will move on to the next patient story. I don't. Who will be the next?
Next patient story is by Dr. Mohit Pal.
Yes, Dr. Mohit Pal.
Mohit sir.
Good evening, everyone. Let me reintroduce myself for whoever's entered later. I'm Dr. Mohit Pal Singh. I am a dental surgeon too, just like ma'am who presented before me. I practice oral medicine and I've been into academics for last 20 years now. And here, the purpose of sharing this case from my side has been to sensitize to all of us here about the basics rather than the elaborate cases. I chose a simple case to present with in the beginning. Can we go to the next slide, please? This was a squamous cell carcinoma case, left buccal mucosa, considerably young, with a habit too. He was 49 years old. Can we go to the next slide, please? When the patient was sent to us for referral, sir, I would like to share with you that at our dental college, I'm having a palliative care center myself. So we get references, and this patient was referred to us after the surgery was performed. And that is when I had picked up that somehow at some point of time, I would like to share this case, that if we had taken up this case before the surgery was performed, it would have been easier for us to manage certain aspects which are difficult to manage once the surgery is initiated or the other aspects of head and neck cancer are initiated. Now, this patient reported to us on 8th of October 20. Next slide, please. He actually was diagnosed of oral squamous cell carcinoma somewhere in July in 2020. And it was just post COVID first wave. So there were a lot of restrictions in referrals, movements, and patient had gone for the surgery without the proper protocol that we had followed. And initially he reported to us, but then he went to the onco part straight and the surgical procedure was done. When he came back to us, he reported with severe pain and restricted mouth opening. And that was fortunately before the radiotherapy was initiated. The only medical condition here to mention which was relevant to this case was that he was diabetic. Next slide, please. I've put a lot of literature here for all the individuals who we would be sharing these presentations with later, so that if I cannot convey certain things with the limited time that we have, at least you can go through the slides and probably it would be helpful. Now, when he had come to us, sir, this patient has been followed up by us till now, and very recently we've had it with him, a very serious episode of pain that I would also want help from you all present here. The basic problem here was that he had severe trismus associated with severe pain. Now, the severe pain intensity, when we took on visual analog scale at that time, that is way back in October, December last year, was around 5. It always was around 5, and he was a very confident man then. We followed him up from then onwards. Next slide, please. The left maxilla and mandible, both the segments were marginally resected. Fortunately, we didn't have oroantral communications, and we had mandibular bone also present there. And you can see there was certain amount of sloughing in evident in the left buccal mucosa, probably in the flap region. And they had done nasolabial flap for him. Next, please. Now, we would go to the treatments that we perform. Now, actually, sir, theoretically, so many literatures are read and not used, and which I realized much later in my practice. And I'm submitting here that it is just last 3-4 years after getting sensitized to the palliative care that I started doing all these small things which made a lot of difference to the patient. And we started on the fluoride applications, which we were teaching all the students. We were taught, we heard about them, but never practiced. And rather very light-headedly, we conveyed it to the patients and never followed it up back. And with this patient, we started with fluoride application in the clinic, and we gave him home care plates also, where he could place the fluoride himself. And in India, we are getting fluoride from 800 to 1000 ppm, whereas the international standards say for radiotherapy induced caries, we should have something about more than 1000 ppm, 1100 to 1200 ppm. But we get around 800 to 1000. Neelkant is the company which is providing, and Florovil is the brand name. Next slide, please. Then, sir, for this reduced mouth opening, we use the gadget which is freely available online. It is called OraBite, and it can be delivered at home. The patient himself can ask for it and order it and get it. Now, financially also, it is not a very expensive gadget, and we have other gags also which are available in the market, which are much, much cheaper. Now, here the financial constraints with this patient wasn't there. So he had himself ordered for this OraBite gadget. It is a plastic gadget and very patient-friendly and tooth-friendly. Although even with this tooth-friendly gadget, he managed to luxate a few of his anterior teeth. Next slide, please. This is a follow-up for all of the participants here to read after we shared the presentation. And we followed him up till now. And in the last visit, which was about a fortnight back, the patient reported back with a severe pain in the left buccal mucosa, and this was because of a secondary infection in the flap region. And an MRI was performed, and it was diagnosed that there was certain accumulation of fluid there, inflammatory. The cause was not identifiable till the culture was done. And of lately, just 2-3 days back, because I was presenting here, I followed it up with my postgraduate, and we came to know that it was a staphylococcal infection, which was recalcitrant to the cefuroxime, which we had prescribed. And actually, sir, I'm not very sure what is being prescribed for the infection for this patient right now, but he's still under follow-up. Next slide, please. In the psychosocial aspects, of lately, I found that this patient, because of multiple visits here and there, has lost faith towards the opinions which are being given to individuals. And there have been a lot of complex variable opinions which this patient has got, because he's been visiting 2-3 places along with the palliative platform that we are offering to him with the oral care. Now he's become very, very judgmental. Fortunately, our team is very closely in touch with this person, but somehow we've of lately realized that how responsive he was to our queries and follow up, he's losing out, or rather we are losing out to him now. So a very important aspect which I feel should be discussed here, to how to keep up with such long follow-up patients where certain amount of loss of hope starts setting in later. And the main concern, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, we'll skip this again. Now, the main concern which the patient had of lately was the recurrence of this disease. Now, besides the common oral conditions that we get to see patients post radiotherapy is xerostomia, altered taste, certain wounds, mucositis, which actually are overlooked by so many of individuals, and we can understand how discomforting this particular aspect of head and neck malignancy post during chemo radio, even after surgery, can be distressing to the patient. And very small measures can make a lot of difference to the quality of life to the patient. And as ma'am was discussing about the cost, and we were talking about cost effectiveness to the patients, we have such wonderful mouthwashes available, and we follow Sudarshan mouthwash, which I think was initiated somewhere in Kerala only, and I have read it in textbooks through the Indian Association of Palliative Care, and I'm sure sir must be aware of it. We prescribe it very often, and simple mouthwashes like warm saline, home care method, betadine mouthwashes, they make a lot of difference. Application of fluoride makes a lot of difference to the patient. And even use of silagogues, which we really used to feel inhibited to initially, which I have started using now. Pilocarpine makes a lot of difference to the quality of life of such patients. Next slide, please. Sir, I would not summarize here because it's again a readable slide. We have less time and lot to discuss. So I think we will leave it here because I'm sure all of us are, or most of you are above all these things. They have been discussed prior in so many presentations. So one thing in the end that I want to share is, next slide, please. Now, when the patient has come to us again, we prescribe him tramadol along with paracetamol. And there was a query also, I think, which analgesics which were given to him initially. Post-surgery tramadol plain contromal DT was given by the surgeon, and it was followed up during our oral impressions and fluoride application and the oral prophylaxis that we had done. After that, now when he's reported back to us, even after consulting the higher center, we've not gone beyond tramadol and paracetamol. And this is where I feel in my practice that I'm still lacking behind is the very open and frank opioid practice. Next, please. Now, the discussion points, sir. In brief, I would say the National Health Service has given a very nice protocol for head and neck cancers, which can be taken up as pre-radio, during radio, and post-radio therapies of head and neck surgeries. With this, I have added in my department a pre-surgical protocol also, where a detailed history should be taken. All the impressions of the upper and lower jaw should be made before the restriction of mouth opening is initiated, so that we always have a benchmark of where we have to attain the mouth opening back to, because oral cancer patients most of the time are associated with oral submucous fibrosis, which is again a very debilitating disorder, and we cannot attain mouth opening beyond a certain limit, and which limits our practice to provide a good quality of life to that patient, because so many procedures cannot be performed, even for that matter doing a proper oral prophylaxis. So these are three different protocols which I have incorporated after taking it from the NHS and the American Dental Association protocols formulated here, added a few, deleted none, and I'm practicing these all protocols. And maybe little later, once we get into discussion, we can go point wise how we can aid to these pre, during, and post therapy palliative management to improve the quality of life. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is during, very important thing, sir. Wherever we incorporate during course, right now also 2 cases are going on. They are doing fluoride application at home. They visit us once a week for oral prophylaxis and any initiation of radiation induced caries, and we do sodium fluoride application besides the home we do stannous fluoride application in the clinic, and sodium fluoride application is being done at home. And we check for the stimulated and unstimulated salivary flow in the clinic, and according to that then adjust the dose of pilocarpine if needed. Otherwise we give oral substitutes for maintaining the oral moisture for the patient to a certain level, so that the discomfort can be reduced and the incidence of the radiation induced caries can be reduced. Next slide, please. And after, very important aspect is when after the radiotherapy can we go for a radical management of any maxillofacial region. A simple procedure is an extraction. How long after the radiation therapy do we go for an extraction? And even a small root fragment, if extracted after 3 to 4 months, also can be very, very distressing to so many patients. That is why I always want to emphasize, and I want to emphasize here also, if you do all that kind of management of head and neck patients before initiation of these surgeries, it helps us managing post radio, chemo, or surgery of head and neck cancers. And very recently I tweeted and tagged sir also with one endorsement from the Australian Dental Association head and neck cancer survivor, who's saying about the importance of dental visit before going in for any radical maxillofacial surgery, radiotherapy, and chemo if required. I think I will end here before we get really late. Sorry for having such a crowded presentation here, but I wanted it to be shared later so that we can, it is just a platform here, but we are all open for discussions whenever I think we want to connect, and we can connect whenever we want. Thank you so much, sir. And
thank you, Dr. Mohit.
Yes.
I don't know, you can unshare the screen. Dr. Mohit was talking about the importance of dental checkup before any procedure or for any procedure like surgery, radiotherapy, or chemotherapy. If there are anybody who want to comment, or if you want to talk about your experience, please come.
Ajit has asked a question in the chat box.
Okay, Dr. Mohit, I think you have mentioned about anti-karyogenic diet. So, Dr. Nilima is asking about.
Sir, anti-karyogenic diets are all those diets which do not include excessive sugars, which are not sticky or slimy, which remain as plaque on the tooth surfaces. They should not have a high viscous index. That is what an anti-karyogenic diet is. The diet should be more fibrous, self-cleansing property should be there in that particular diet, and which includes, there is a vast, if you actually search for it, you would find a lot of anti-karyogenic diet protocols that you have. The basic thing is it should not be sticky and sugary.
Dr. Ajit was asking about analgesics given. I think you mentioned that he was getting Condramal
Yes.
previous to surgery, and then you gave tramadol after the surgery. That's
Yes,
what,
the tramadol
I
was
understand.
prescribed by the onco reference that we made, sir. And I, on my behalf, had added pregabalin with tryptomar, pregab NT 7510, 1 HS just 3 days back, and I haven't had a follow-up from him. I actually wanted to connect with him today, but somehow his mobile is coming switched off. So I couldn't get the feedback because he was not getting relieved by tramadol, and unfortunately we've not been able to send him to any other center where probably, if needed be, if any other analgesics needs to be given.
Where was the pain actually? And what?
Sir, the pain
what
was
is the-
in the whole buccal space region, extending from temporomandibular joint, posterior auricular region, and the submandibular region on the affected side.
Okay. And do you want to comment?
This is a very common clinical presentation for me, and I appreciate your presentation, Dr. Mohit, and the necessity of having dental surgeons look at the mouth before chemotherapy and radiation. It is not a big surprise. I think people who have heard me speak for the duration of the 16 weeks of this course, not a big surprise that I'm not surprised that tramadol did not help him. Tramadol is an opiate. It is a prodrug, which is converted to an opiate, but if you do not have the right CYP enzyme, you can't convert it to for pain relief. However, in the setting of India, my understanding is many people do not have access to a prescriber for morphine and methadone, but this is the patient that I would trial methadone on because his pain is undoubtedly neuropathic, given the strong innervation of the mouth. And my suspicion is that he would benefit from methadone. But your reaction to start pregabalin in this country, that would be a very expensive choice. We would use gabapentin preferentially. Also can be life-changing for patients. So, so pain control still quite difficult, especially in the setting of still, I wasn't clear if the infection had been cleared. So very, very tough case, but even a harder case to treat pain in an environment if morphine and methadone are not available.
True, ma'am. That is what actually I wanted to present here. Even after trying so much, somehow I have not been able to actually get a very free access to methadone or morphine practice. I'm looking forward to it, and maybe I think there would be a time where it becomes easier.
But Dr. Mohit, why can't you get it? I mean, have you applied for the status of a recognized medical institution?
Yes, sir. We've applied it through two different institutes. One is my own, and one where we've done a memorandum of understanding. That's a hospital where we usually go and perform surgeries. And unfortunately, sir, for whatever reasons, it's been more than 2 years now that on some pretext or the other, we've not been able to get the license. And the best and the easiest answer that we are getting is wait, let the COVID go.
No, I think, but Dr. Mohit, this is totally unacceptable. I am saying this to all the participants. Legally, just saying wait for COVID, etc., is illegal. The drug controller of the state is authorized, is law bound to either give you the RMI certificate or reject it showing a cause within 2 months. You must, everybody here who has the difficulty must let us work with you. There is a process that we have to go through. We are not doing it to fight any bureaucracy. We are doing it for our patients. And it's our primary duty to get it done. Please allow us to work with us. At every step, do please contact us and we will work with you to overcome the problems. This has happened. There are some states where it is particularly difficult. Sorry, Dr. Mohit, I have forgotten which state are you from?
Sir, I am from Rajasthan. I am
Okay.
based at Udaipur.
Okay, let us sort this out. I know that in Punjab particularly it's difficult, but anywhere else this should be quite doable. That's one thing. Secondly, it has been pointed out by others also. Dr. Mohit, there is an element of, okay, so he deserved that morphine or methadone, and that is something that we must get for people like that. Secondly, I saw in the chat box about the cost of pregabalin. Let me make 2 points. One, the World Health Organization has taken pregabalin and gabapentin out of the recommendations for cancer pain management. The reason they have chosen is that the companies submitted false evidence, and they have actually given 4 references. If you look up the WHO guidelines for cancer pain, it will come into view. They have given the reasons why the companies falsified evidence. That's first one. They are not saying that it's not effective. The evidence submitted to show that it is effective was false. Number 1 point. Secondly, a first-line medicine is amitriptyline. No official protocol recommends starting amitriptyline and pregabalin together. Our first line should be amitriptyline, build the dose up, and it is acceptable to add a anticonvulsant later, or the vice versa. But in this case, it's unfortunate that this person with the pain will have all this expert treatment from you, but we are unable to give basic pain management. Let us certainly solve this problem.
Thank you, sir. This patient story highlights the importance of dental care before radiotherapy and chemotherapy, and the type of pain that the patient may experience with oral surgeries and dental surgeries. Methadone would be a good choice in these patients if it is available. Otherwise, we have to build up neuropathic pain agents such as tricyclic antidepressants. Okay. I think, thank you, Doctor. Yes, and
Dr. Hari Mohan suggested steroids, and I have used steroids if I'm convinced that the infection is clear, to settle this kind of pain down. But I wasn't, so I agree. When I get a call in the middle of the night and a patient has some steroids at home, and I believe that this is not infectious, I have absolutely used steroids to simmer something down for a short course. So just wanted to comment on that.
thank you, and thank you, Dr. Mohit. I think we will move on to the next patient story.
Sunil, yes, we have to just a quick answer to Dr. Rajiv. Nerve blocks in this case is not a viable option. Dr. Hari Mohan, thank you for your comment. It's your personal experience, but these personal experiences are what are often subject to bias, that pregabalin is more useful than gabapentin, the cost, etc. The dose of pregabalin that is recommended for to be used, something that we do not give ordinarily. And if we do give that kind of dose, imagine what the cost will be. So let us not our personal opinions override available evidence. Okay, Harshapriya says not much different from gabapentin. But that's again a personal opinion, and I would say, where is your personal experience about amitriptyline? I'm not saying that amitriptyline always will work, not saying that it is better than gabapentin or pregabalin. Just saying that the fact that it is inexpensive, you shouldn't hold against it. All that is expensive is not necessarily better.
Noted, sir.
Sunil, sorry, you please go ahead. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Mohit.
Thank you, sir.
I don't, can we go to the next patient story?
Yes, sir. Next patient story by Dr. Pradima Agrawal. Ma'am? Pradima, ma'am?
Yes, I'm hearable.
Is it visible, ma'am? Your case presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Pratima Agrawal, working as a medical officer at BMCHRC Hospital, Jaipur. Next slide, please. My case is about 66-year-old female, a diagnosed case of right breast carcinoma with myelodysplastic syndrome. Patient was diagnosed in 2018. Next slide. Patient come in emergency with complaint of dizziness, partial hemorrhagic spots, bilateral upper limb, dyspnea on routine activity, generalized weakness, reduced appetite, non-healing oral ulcer. That was presented on 29th May 2021. Next slide. Patient history of illness was right MRM was done, post chemo radiation in 2018 completed from May 2018 to October 2018. Chemo was given after the radiation completed again, 29 October 2018 to 1st August 2019. In Feb 2021, patient diagnosed with myelodysplastic syndrome with multilinear dysplasia. Treatment started again under the hemato-oncologist. Patient first referred in palliative department on 25 April 2021, when attendant refused for further chemo and refused for bone marrow transplant. From the date of first palliative referral, patient admitted in palliative department 8 to 10 times with same complaints on end of fever, weakness, and partial hemorrhagic spots, respiratory distress. Same complaint was present every time. According to complaint, repeatedly RDP, STP, blood transfusion was done. Next. On examination, patient was moderately obese, fully conscious, but does financially well, not well matched, well educated. Pala was present, Patrici spots was present, conjunctival hemorrhage was present, or a non-healing oral ulcer was present. Vitals wise, tachycardic and tachypneic, BP was low, 100/60, and febrile, mildly febrile. Systemic examination, there was bilateral grafts on chest, CVS NAD, CNS NAD, per abdominal, there was mild hepatomegaly. Next slide. Treatment CBC was done outside by a patient's attendant on 28 May 2021. On the CBC, platelets was 2000, hemoglobin 6.5, TLC was 7000. Chest X-ray PAVU on 29 May shows the bilateral pneumonitis because the patient was COVID positive on 12 May 2021 and taken complete treatment of COVID under the physician. Treatment, this time we give the 2-unit Taxol and 1-unit SDP, or tablet Dolo 650 mg for fever, Dolozal for oral ulcer. Next slide. Psychological aspect, patient doesn't know about progression and treatment, but she believed that after blood transfusion, his appetite improved and general condition improved. Patient husband was a cardiac patient, so caregiver hidden about the progression and condition from them. Even they never attend our OPD and IPD anytime. Patient's caregiver was a hired caregiver, not a family member, because patient had only 2 married daughters, out of which one was COVID positive, which lived in the same city, and other was outside of the city. Every time on admission, caregiver and one son-in-law attend the OPD and emergency, and every time we do teleconsult with daughter for decisions. According to son-in-law, they can't left patient in dying phase with low platelets, low hemoglobin, and don't want to break patient's belief. So every time they do CBC themselves outside and consult from physician without consulting physician. Next slide. Medication, only tablet dolo 650 mg was given, that was paracetamol, or IV antibiotic, which was not prescribed by us, that was prescribed from the outside physician. Dolozal local application for oral ulcer. Next slide. Main concern, patient concern was to improve appetite by transfusion, wants total healing of hemorrhagic spots or oral ulcer, which was appearing every time on a new part of the body. Family concern was to do something till that. Can't live in dying condition to prevent regression throughout the same. Doctor concern was to prevent unnecessary hospitalization in this pandemic time. So prevent COVID exposure for both patient and family member. Explain condition to husband slowly to avoid shock as patient was a cardiac patient. Husband was a cardiac patient. Next slide. Summary, 66-year-old female, known case of right breast carcinoma with myelodysplastic syndrome, came in emergency with complaint of dyspnea on routine activities, hemorrhagic spots on upper limb, no active bleeding, on end of fever with low platelets. Discussion point, what is the criteria for blood and platelet transfusion in this kind of patients? How we can counsel family when is the need of transfusion? Ethically, can we take consent from son-in-law in this case? Is this the right time for breaking collusion of patient? Should we continue long-term antibiotic if this ulcer is related to disease? How to convince the family for same? How to counsel family for unnecessary repeated investigation and hospitalization? Thank you. Discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Pradima. So, if anybody has any comments on this, there are many questions regarding the transfusion and how the consent from whom we need to take consent, etc. So, if anybody has any comments, please.
I will just comment that this is a very difficult case where family is grieving and grieving in a way that makes them come back into the healthcare system at a time where the healthcare system is a very vulnerable place and potentially dangerous to this patient with poor immunity. It appears that the son-in-law and daughter are trying to protect both her and her husband. I would, just to say, in the US, we would not be able to have these conversations with the son-in-law. That would not be acceptable in our system until the husband and both daughters had said that they're unable to make decisions. So it would need to be an active act. I share that for interest on the part of the learners, but it would be interesting to me if the patient herself chose not to know what is going on with her. Can you comment on that?
A family don't want to tell about the progression to patient. They think that if they will tell the progression of the disease, the patient will suddenly die.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to comment on platelet transfusion and yeah, when to transfuse? There are no
Sir, in
response.
guidelines, sir, I want to speak something. Sir, in guidelines that we read, below 10,000 if there is bleeding. If below 5,000, we should transfuse every time without bleeding. And if there is any procedure and any radiation chemo that more than 50,000, we should transfuse. But this is a financially well patient, so she can afford. But what is about the poor patient? We can't repeatedly transfuse every time blood and platelets.
Yeah, this is a very big question, which usually occurs in patients with malignancy also. So, sir, what's your opinion?
Dr. Hari Mohan has raised his hand. Dr. Sunil?
Okay, Dr. Hari Mohan.
I can wait. There's no, sir can tell. You want me to
It's
tell?
okay, Hari.
Okay, sir.
Just
I think as you said, 20,000 is the usual thing where we give platelets in to avoid bleeding, 10,000 also. But in this case, actually, it's a, I think, myelodysplasia or myelosuppression, which is not going to end because we are not going to treat it. So I think family counseling is required. We have to tell them inevitably this is going to happen. And continuing to transfuse and do everything is just a stopgap. We are going to prolong things. But if they can afford, continue doing it. But they should be clearly knowing this is not a treatment. It's only a substitution that is going on to prevent probably massive cerebral hemorrhage or something, which will enter faster. Generally, that's what happens. So I think that is the only approach which can be taken because we are not planning any treatment for her. So she will go through this. It's bound to happen. That's all.
Thank you, Dr. Hari.
and would you like to go first?
I've given my comments. This is
Okay.
definitely a situation where we would counsel the family that this is potentially bringing the patient into the hospital for harm, especially during the pandemic. And it's time to focus on family, not medical interventions. I understand that that might not work in the Indian context. I'm
Yeah.
very
So,
aware.
And about 2 points. One thing that's happening in this pandemic era, of course, is in the other side of the story. The person is bleeding, possibly. Person is bleeding, suffering, and the family cannot cope. We are not able to provide support at home. And when the hospitals also, I mean, this is rampant. Even if our intentions are so pure, but the family's inability to cope there and lack of support given in the home is another thing that weighs heavily on our minds. But even if we admit them to the institution, should we continue to provide blood and platelets? This is another issue. The count is slow. Platelet count is only 8,000. Therefore, we transfuse. Before we treat the platelets, we have to ask, what's our objective? Is it only to prevent bleeding? Or is it to do the best for the patient? Are we not duty bound? The duty of care of the doctor is to mitigate suffering, is to improve quality of life. By doing this, are we improving quality of life? We may be prolonging life, and by prolonging life, we are stretching out the dying process and causing a prolongation of suffering. That's what we are doing. I am thinking of myself as the patient there. You are treating the platelets, and you are unable to relieve my misery, and it is continuing for a longer period of time. Thank you very much. I don't want it as the patient. But here, the patient doesn't even know. There is a conflict between, and as what our duty should be, and what is realistically possible. Our ethical duty is to do the best for the patient, but the family, with all good intentions, is preventing that. I mean, when artificial life support measures are already introduced, in this case, this platelet administration is an artificial life support measure, prolongation of life, prolongation of artificial life support. When that has been introduced, a practical solution is while our work with the patient, the family continues, while we continue to counsel them, we continue existing measures, we will not escalate measures. It would be a huge mistake then to add another one and go and ask them, well, the only thing that can save his life, prolong his life, is to do this also. Shall we do that? Shall we put him on a ventilator? When we know that it will not improve quality of life, then we should not escalate artificial life support measures. But I am, for a period of time, willing to continue the transfusion, though I know that it is not in the best interest of the patient, because the patient doesn't know, and the immediate family now seems to have the right to take decisions. We may go by the decision. I know that is not a very satisfactory solution. Is this the right time for breaking collusion? Certainly it is the right time to try. The best time is not this. The best time was long back. At that time we could not do. So right now, it is important to tell them, look, what you are doing with all good intentions is only worsening the person's suffering. Let us do the best for the person. Ethically, can we take consent from the son-in-law in this case? That's a very difficult question for me. And maybe you can answer the question from another perspective. Legally, no. But ethically, if the son-in-law is the main caregiver, actively doing the best for the patient, trying his best, maybe ethically that is right. I don't know the answer really. Continue long-term antibiotics in disease-related fever and ulcer. Why are we recommending antibiotics if they are not helpful for him? It is not a question of leaving it to the family. We should not be making a recommendation for any medicine that we do not believe is useful for him. If they bring up, if there is a doctor in the family, they'll bring up, hey, give that, this, etc. In that case, we will continue our conversations. I know, having said all this, dear friends, even earlier this month, no, in July, we had one patient who was being given, who was not told that her disease was incurable. She was given to understand by the family that we are trying to cure her disease. And she died in that state. We couldn't break the collusion. We couldn't give her the right information which she was asking for. Having said that, we did not offer them artificial life support measures. We offered only comfort measures. We continued them. That may be the balance that we may have to compromise at.
Okay, thank you, sir. I would like to ask another question. Suppose this patient knows about the disease and the patient is asking for transfusion. What should be our approach? Patient knows about the disease and patient knows that this is the only thing that can go for some time. So how would we go about this?
Sunil, your question is to the group or to me? To the group best. Anybody have, we have 5 minutes more. Does anybody want to answer that? Shashi says we should give transfusion. Anybody else? Any comment? Manisha? Manisha agrees. Respect the patient's wishes.
I think just like we talk to the family, if the patient is able to listen, we can counsel her also. Tell her that it doesn't serve much purpose. It only increases her agony. Not to put a fight that this is going to end her life or anything, but tell her that transfusions recurrent, if it is helpful in some way, we can do it. Not all the time whenever the blood test is showing. We'll have to convince her. If I think that's the way to go about it. Because the person is the patient is telling that because she feels when the thing is low, she should get it. That's her right. So we can convince her that this is going to continue. It's not going to end. And there is no necessity that every time we need to transfuse. We'll have to talk to her. That's the only way about it.
Look, here, I mean, okay, my answer would be a bit different. As I said, I am thinking of myself in the patient's position. I know that transfusion can keep me alive for a few more days. Or maybe, who knows, maybe for a month. And I want to stay alive. I don't want to die yet. If I can have one more month with the family or even 1 week, if I like to do that, that's my right to, that's my right. Okay, now what is your duty as a doctor is to do the best for me. But if you believe that the transfusion is harmful to me, then you are not duty bound to give it to me. Then you should advise me, no, I will not give it to you because it will cause you more harm. But here is my wish. Sunil says the patient knows that what the patient has. Despite that wants the transfusion, I believe I will give it. And if I am the patient, and if I am asking for it, I have the right to receive it. It would be different if I am asking for a potentially harmful treatment. If chemotherapy is sure to be harmful at this stage of the illness, and I am still saying, doctor, give me more, I'll try it. Then you shouldn't. I agree with that, but not in this case. But Shashidharan's comment, if I am the patient, I won't ask for transfusion, but if it is a close relative of mine, I will advise for transfusion. My answer, Shashi, if it is your relative or any one of your patients, you should still do what is the best for the patient. If I have how long will the benefit of transfusion last? If it is for anemia, 3 weeks, right? The feeling of well-being. I am not dead yet. I am alive. If I am told we can give you a transfusion, it may make you less tired, but that will be short-lived, only for a few weeks. Then it is my choice, isn't it? It's my life. 3 weeks can be precious for me. I'm very tired, I'm exhausted, but this will save me. So again, Shashi, you will advise provided you know that is the patient's wish. If the patient doesn't want it, stop. Enough is enough. Just keep me comfortable, time for me to go. Then advising that transfusion, I think, is wrong. And we need your wisdom.
It looks like, so I know others want. Oops.
And 1 minute.
I have 1 minute.
Dr. Shashidharan.
I like to. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Let Madam speak.
Oh, sorry. I like the principle in this situation of something called a time-limited trial. So say this patient says that she wants a transfusion, and we say, let's try transfusions for 1 more week and see if your life is better and see if you can get back home. But I do this often in my practice where I don't say no, I don't withhold, but I I say, let's try it for a short period of time. Let's try intubation for 3 to 4 days. Let's try things for a certain period of time. And often the family is with me and the patient after that period of time because they don't see that their life is necessarily better. So I introduce that concept and wonder if this would be the right intervention now. Over to you.
Amrita, totally agreed with your comment. We don't have the time to discuss it, but totally agreed. Back to you, Sunil.
Dr. Sasidaran.
No, nothing.
That
As
would
Madam
be the
said,
last comment.
nothing more.
Okay, thank you. So there are certain situations where, or most of the situations, we have to respect the autonomy, but there will be some situations where we have to also be between what are the benefits and or harm against autonomy. So I think this is one of the situations. So thank you, Dr. Pratima and Dr. Mohit and who else? I don't remember the name, but thank you all of you for your patient stories. Thank you, and I think we will meet next week. We don't have a class, but after Onam, it will be the last session. So thank you all.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, sir.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
day, Anne.
Thank you. Today is my birthday, and my birthday present that I request from all participants is they fill out the methadone questionnaire. Will you do that, please? Thank you, everybody.
Wait.
I'm a
40
broken record.
I was thinking.
Wait.
I was thinking you will send something
Wait.
for
yeah.
birthday to celebrate.
Wait. 40 people are left. Can we sing a happy birthday to Anne?
Oh, no,
Yes.
just do the
Yeah.
questionnaire. That's
Yes,
fine.
sure, sir.
Hey, everybody unmute. Unmute. Who is the musician? Get started.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. Happy birthday, Dr. Anne.
Happy birthday to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, but you're not off the hook. Please do the questionnaire too.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
Have a
have a
great
good
day, Anne.
weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.